Hi, everyone. I'm Gary Summers, and welcome to the audio edition of Mind, Body, Soul, a show about your mental, physical, and spiritual wellness. Well, we have another wonderful and interesting guest today, Maggie Atkinson, spirit name Stormcrow. And I hope I certainly said that right, Maggie. But in any event, welcome, Maggie Atkinson.
Oh, hi, Gary. Thanks for allowing me to be part of this project. I'm really excited about it, actually.
And I believe all the way from Calgary.
Yes, I'm out in Calgary. Yeah. COVID,
Okay.
thank you very much. Yeah.
So this is far-reaching, and we have people all across Canada who want to be part of this. So Maggie, before we start, can you tell our listeners what you do and what they can expect to hear from you today?
Yeah, I'm a shamanic healer, and I've been practicing for probably going on for 20 years now. And I want to talk about how shamanic healing can work to support healing in many situations and difficulties in your life. You know, the shamans can work with the physical body, they can work with the spiritual body, the mental body, all of these things. So I focus myself on healing the soul and the unconscious. Yeah, so that's what I want to hopefully be able to talk to you about, how I do that, how I accomplish it, and what the results might be.
And it's so wonderful. I feel every time I interview wonderful people like yourself, I get this great wonderful knowledge that comes down, and I feel like it's a therapy for me every time I talk to natural healers like yourself. So can just give our listeners some of the main characteristics of shamanism.
Yeah, the term itself, it can be really difficult to find information that's connected to shamanism in a healthy way. And so I just can think of a few. One of the main characteristics is a reverence and respect for the power of nature as living spiritual entities. Shamans are also combined with a spiritual connection, right? Non-ordinary realms of existence. Shamans often work in the dark because we hear a lot about the light, and yet when we are born, we gestate in the darkness. So from a shamanic perspective, darkness has as much information and healing qualities to offer as does light. So they work in the dark realms much more than other healers may. They work particularly with a spirit guide. I have a very specific spirit guide that helps me with my shamanic development. So I work with schools in Ireland and Scotland that teach me how to use the tools, rattles, drums, some kind of smudging techniques. These kinds of things are specific to me. And as I develop and learn, I will maybe gravitate to some tools and maybe not some others. But you need to have a shamanic spirit guide. Another main quality or characteristic is the ability to enter intentionally into a trance state. I know that might sound a bit odd, but it's sort of a meditative state in which I can travel in the spirit realms and communicate with different entities and spirits that are here to support information and healing techniques that I can bring back into the middle world, which is the world we live in right now, that can help support healing for the people who come to me. Very successfully, actually.
So for our listeners who, many of you may have heard the term trance, and I use it myself in hypnotherapy, but social psychologists tell us that we go into trance every 90 minutes of our waking day, and not a deep trance, but just to give you some examples. Have you ever driven on the road and you got to a point where you said, how did I get here? I should have turned a half mile, 2 miles back the road. Have you ever walked into a room to get something or walk upstairs to get something, and when you went in the room, you forgot what you were going for? And probably the best one that most people experience is when you dial a number and when it's ringing at the other end, you forgot the person you were calling. Those are kind of examples of light trance. But when you take that, what Maggie is talking about is taking that trance and going deeper. Because really the whole concept of this, Maggie, and you know more about this than I do, is we all have the ability within ourselves to heal ourselves.
Yes.
We just need to trust ourselves, figure out how we go about doing that, and then miracles. And I've seen miracles happen myself with just being able to trust yourself to go into that realm, because all the answers are within us.
Yes. Okay. Yeah.
So when and how did you determine or realize that you had abilities consistent with shamanism? So is this something particular to certain people, or can anybody learn this?
It's interesting because, when I talk about a trance, I think maybe it's a little deeper than the ones you were just describing, because I do it with intention. So I go with a very specific intention. So I might say, I want to journey for Gary specifically, and I'll use drums or rattles to get me into a particular deep state where I can actually access Gary's spirit. I can access spirits of different realms that will give me very specific information that maybe Gary in the middle world has forgotten about, but still impacts his life. So I think that I think in my experience that most shamans are actually born, but that doesn't mean that you can't learn some of the techniques of shamanism.
Okay. So let's talk about some of the healing practices of shamanism and how can they help to facilitate healing. So kind of give us some examples of when a person would want to come to you and what you could help them work on.
It's funny. People sometimes come to me when they have a certain malaise. They don't actually know what's the matter. They just know that they're in a state of depression that they can't get out of. Other people come to me for very specific things. Sometimes family difficulties, sometimes problems with, substance abuse, physical problems and ailments. So there's a variety of different reasons why people will come to me specifically. And generally, like I said, I don't ask them what they are, because often people think, well, I have a problem right now in my life that I can't deal with, and it's making me ill, and it's making my life difficult for me. But what they don't understand is often that difficulty comes up at something that's happened in their past, right? So generally what I'll do is I'll just say, I just need your first name. And I'll go straight and I'll say, what can I do to support healing for this individual? And so spirit guides will give me various different ways to bring information that will support that healing. And as I say in my website, every person has a very individual and very specific response from the spirits that comes through me.
Okay.
Did you want me to go on?
No, you go. No, yeah, absolutely. I just said, okay, you continue. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So, some of the things I talk about is power retrieval, and people talk about spirit animals quite a bit, but the idea of a spirit animal is different depending on what culture you come from. From my perspective, I prefer to call them helping spirits. And sometimes that's what will come forward for me for a particular individual. A spirit or a helping spirit will come forward to me, and they could be animals. Sometimes they're plants, they're healing plants, and they'll tell me very specifically what that plant can do for that particular person and how to use it. Helping spirits will do the same thing. So for example, if I have somebody and a crow comes in for somebody, I'll speak to that person and say, what is it you know about crows? How does crow inform your life, if it does at all? And what can you learn about crow? They can talk about some of the things that are happening in your life now. And it has a very physical manifestation. People will all of a sudden see, murders of crows coming to them, or they'll see a crow in their backyard, that will firm or give some kind of substance in the middle world to that journey. And the other, sorry.
Yeah. I just wanted to bring back to one point that you made when I said about why would people want to come to see you? Was it a specific reason or something general? And you brought up a really good point. You said sometimes people will come and just not feel right with some kind of general malaise, a kind of a fog, or they just lack direction or something. And I think what's important for listeners to understand is use your feelings. And I say this all the time when I speak, use your feelings as your emotional guidance system. If you don't feel right, there's something not in balance, and you really would do yourself a big favor if you did something about that, because ignoring problems just means they're going to stay around longer. So I just wanted to bring that in, because a lot of times people just ignore the feelings and they think that, well, this is what life has given me. I guess this is what I have to put up with, and I guess I have to live with this for the rest of my life. And every person that I talk to says, no, it doesn't have to be that way.
And it certainly doesn't have to be that way.
Right.
But yeah, so that's, I was just going to go
Yeah,
into
go
one of the
absolutely.
main,
Yeah,
one of the main things.
yeah, you go right ahead. Go right ahead.
Okay. We have a time delay, don't we?
Yeah, well, a little bit, but I mean, when you say something, it just twigs my memory into saying
Yeah.
something to just to kind of support what you and what everybody else keeps saying
That's
about the healing world.
It's wonderful. I
Yeah,
really enjoy it.
go ahead.
So, generally what I'll do is like I say, when I go with an intention, I don't decide myself, I'm going to go and do a soul retrieval for Gary. That's not my business to do that. My business is Gary tells me I'm not feeling well. I need you to help me. And the rest of it's not my business. So I go into my journey saying, I need to help Gary. And often they'll show me soul retrievals. And the soul retrieval is an interesting concept. And the way I can maybe describe it is that if we think of ourselves coming into the world as a holistic spiritual being,
Hmm.
right, the way we're meant to function in the world, sometimes during birth or things that come afterwards, we have some kind of a trauma in our life, and it could be anything. So for somebody who says something to me, it says, Maggie, oh, you're just such a bad girl, And for me, that might be, it doesn't bother me.
Yeah,
But if somebody said that to Gary,
right.
that might have a really huge impact on him. And
Yeah.
so, from the shamanic perspective, a soul part will say, oh, I don't like that. I can't function with that.
Hmm.
I'm leaving. And they just leave. And they go to a different part of the spiritual realms, we'll put it that way.
Okay.
And often, when that event passes, that spirit part will come back and reintegrate. Sometimes that doesn't happen. And so what you end up then is that's part of you, the creative part, maybe the part that was the one that to bring you happiness,
Hmm.
that part leaves and doesn't come back. And as a result of that, it can result in physical unwell, emotional, and spiritual illnesses, right?
Monkey,
And that,
go ahead,
yeah,
continue.
I was just going to say that makes this our ability to maintain a really healthy balance in life. It disrupts that. And then it continues to get worse and worse as we try to solve it through, self-soothing items like too much to eat or bad relationships or maybe a little bit too much to drink, And when that's not what you need is that soul retrieval returned.
We in the research that I've done, we were born with two fears, or two phobias: the fear of falling and the fear of loud noises. Everything else that we have is acquired, either by an experience that we had where we felt foolish, or somebody said something to us that made us feel bad, or you're stupid, or if you were smart, just as smart as your brother, and we take that and that stays with us for a long time. So the bad news is, if you can acquire these beliefs about yourself, then the good news is you can unacquire those beliefs about yourself.
Absolutely.
So
Yeah.
so again, people again think that they have this negative belief about themselves for whatever reason. uh their experiences taught them that. Someone told you, when you all of a sudden decided, okay, I guess if the person told me, then it must be true, and then you carry that negative belief with you for as long as you live. Anyway, you go ahead.
Absolutely.
You go ahead.
And there's other things that can cause us to, soul loss, and that can be accidents. I was in a terrible accident that, almost cost me my life. And that's when these shamanic abilities started to manifest with a vengeance. And I didn't know what they were at the time, and I had to find out. Otherwise, I was not going to
Mm-hmm.
survive. It was that
Mm-hmm.
simple. And I grew up with horrible migraines that the doctors couldn't solve, And so but those kinds of things, accidents, surgeries, severe illnesses, where your physical body has been disrupted so severely that part of your soul goes, oh no, I'm not dealing with this. Off we go, and they don't come back. And so what you're doing then is you lose that sense of self-purpose, your confidence, your ability to enjoy peace in your life, just day-to-day life. That's what happens. And so that also can make us more vulnerable to less positive energy. It's like residual energy that
Mm-hmm.
can collect around us, depression, these kinds of things, and also bringing on things that repeat in your life. You ever notice that when something keeps repeating in your life and you just understand why this keeps happening, one thing after another and after another, that can be a result of soul loss as well. So this is the kind of work that I do. So I travel to my guides, and they give me this information, very specific information about what happened to, for example, Gary when he was 6. And they show me exactly. And so I'm able to come back and say to you, do you remember this time? Does this make sense to you? And all of a sudden you'll get these memories, and that's part of the healing in and of itself.
When you talked about these negative things keep showing up, and I read a really good quote last week. It said, life will continue to show you the problem until you've learned the lesson.
That's right. Exactly. Exactly.
So what's important is not the problem, but it's figuring out what the lesson is from the
Right.
from the adversity that you faced. It's not, failing is never a problem. It's figuring out what lesson you learned from that failure. Some of the greatest lessons I learned in life was from some of the greatest adversity I ever faced.
Absolutely.
I was able
Absolutely.
to I was able to reach through, grab onto something that was positive, and bring it forward. Extraction, Maggie.
Extraction. Yeah. Well, that's a little bit more, yeah, because we don't talk about that in Western culture so much, right? We don't like to talk about those kinds of things, but they can cause difficulties for us. And one of the reasons that we can sometimes attract energy that's maybe not so positive for us is when we're in that weakened state, because we're depressed, we're upset, we may be indulging a little bit too much of the kind of material that doesn't support our wellness. And so it breaks down our ability for balance in life and to keep ourselves safe. So that will lead to a vulnerable state in our physical, emotional, and spiritual health. And what we'll do is we'll kind of attract unhealthy nature. And that can be individuals. I mean, if you're in a space, where individuals who like to drink too much are going to collect, that's the kind of energy you're going to attract to you. And this happens in the spirit or the energetic world, where you can have energies that can become attached to you, and you don't necessarily recognize they're there, but they still have an impact on your life. And in fact, I've had incidences, believe it or not, where I had one individual who worked with a senior citizens home, and the young man died. He was in his 90s and he passed over. And when he did that, he became stuck in the helper's aura. And so she was suffering from headaches as a result of his intervention. And when I did my journey, he didn't realize he was there. So I had to say, hello, guess where you are? You're stuck in so-and-so's energy. And he was, oh. And so I was able to remove him. He wasn't necessarily a negative energy, but his impact on her, because he'd become entwined with hers, was negative, because she ended up having headaches and she was ill as a result of it. Other things. Oh,
you just keep getting all these thoughts into my head, and it's funny that you say, people have this negative energy and they don't know why it's there, but it's there. Carl Jung was a famous German psychiatrist, and he coined the term shadows. He said shadows are the things we don't like about ourselves, and he said you can learn a lot about yourself by just looking at the problems of other people. And so a shadow would be, because we were all basically born equal. My belief is we were all born equal, but we acquire these negative beliefs. And that's why someone who's an ex-smoker doesn't like being around people who smoke, because they remind him of when he was a smoker. So when you see something in somebody that really bothers you, it really reminds you of the same problem that you have in yourself. It's just that some people have difficulty controlling that problem and other people are able to keep it in check. So when you see a person who really bothers you, because every day we can be good, other days we can be bad, some days we can be generous, some days we can be stingy. All of us have the ability to be in both extremes. And I'll turn it back to you. Michael J. Fox said, and I thought it was a great quote, he said, be kind to negative people, because they got a lot of stuff going on in their lives.
Absolutely.
And we have no idea what story people have, but they have a story.
Absolutely. And I see this in people, some of the unhealthy energy they exude, and without even knowing or recognizing it. And I have the ability to see it. I can see where it is in the body. I can see what's around them. I can see the kind of material that's attached to them and why. And I'm able to remove it actually in my journey. So it happens. I know it sounds, it's very much out there, but it does happen. It's moving.
Everything is out there. Maggie. Can you do this remotely?
Yes, I can do it remotely. And I have people, really people who are very frightened about some of the things they've experienced in their lives. And there can be many things that we don't necessarily talk about in the middle world because it's too scary.
Sure.
And so I'm the person that other shamans or mediums, they send people to me because I'm able, I don't know why, but I'm able to work with those kinds of people and to get rid of that kind of energy that's really plaguing their lives and making them ill and frightened. So
when you talk about journeying and soul retrieval, like who would and I don't know if we really get into this much, but who would you recommend this kind of healing to?
okay, well, anybody really, lots of people. Let's see, who would I recommend it to? Well, I'd recommend it to people who are feeling depressed, people who are dealing with. I get a lot of people who are in abusive situations, really serious stuff, and they can't get out of it, and they don't know why. I have people who deal with drug and alcohol abuse, and they don't know why they cannot. They can't get well, they can't get it out of their lives, those kinds of people. I also get people who believe they're being bothered by spirits, angry spirits, negative energies. I get those sorts of people, and it can be based on many different things, but their understanding of it is that I am being bothered by negative spirits. But my guides, and the work I do, I will look and see, okay, what's actually happening, and then I'll talk to them and say, okay, have you considered this? Have you thought about that? And the results are really positive, actually. So those are the kinds of people.
And I notice some of the words that these holistic healers use, and I never hear anybody, even yourself, saying you should do this, you should do that. We always say, have you thought about this? Have you considered this? When I had my radio show, I had an intuitive in. And my producer and co-host, when this lady walked into the room, she looked at him and she said, I see a really large dog sitting behind you. Mm-hmm. And he got really freaked out. And right throughout the show, you could tell he was thrown off by it. Mm-hmm. So she looked at him at the end of the show. She said, you need to come and see me. So she waited after people had left, and three of us sat down, and the co-host said to this girl, can you tell me what you saw? She said, well, I saw a really aggressive dog behind you, and the dog is there for a reason. She said, do you know what the reason is? And he said, well, we had a really aggressive big dog, and he attacked some people, and I didn't trust him with my kids, and I was afraid he was going to hurt the kids, and he was overly aggressive, and we took him, and they suggested that he needed to be put down. And he regretted the decision. He hated the decision, but and he didn't put the dog down. He brought it back to the shelter or whatever it was, and the people at the shelter decided that was really the only way that they could deal with the dog, because everything that they tried, what happened in his past, so the dog was put down. And he felt really bad about doing it because he felt he was responsible, in which he wasn't. So the dog was there, and then she said to him again, she said, you really need to come and talk to me, because you need to release this, because it's really problematic in your life.
Yes, absolutely. And I do that quite a bit. I feel people feeling guilty about things that really were not their responsibility.
Absolutely.
Often too, things that happened to them in their childhood when they're 5, 6, 7 years old. Somehow they feel responsible for that, and they carry that with them as well, but they don't recognize that's what they're carrying with them, but they don't recognize it's something that happened a long time ago that had nothing to do with them. Well, and that's another
go ahead.
ability that I have, is that I'm doing a lot of work with actually, one-to-one mediumship, where I can talk to spirits, directly, as opposed to journeying. It's a different way of contacting spirits. So sometimes I'll get something in a journey, and then for more explanation, as I'm speaking to somebody, like I'm speaking to you now, sometimes a spirit or a relative will come through and say, oh, no, that's not what I meant. What I meant was this. So I have that ability to be able to, or ask them about this, remind them of that, and all of this discussion between myself and whoever happens to want to speak with me brings these things to light. And that's interesting. Yeah.
When we talk about things like this, and people don't really, there are a lot of skeptical people out there, right?
Yep.
But when you go back to young kids, I mean, a lot of fears and phobias happen by the time kids are 7, because their brains are not developed enough. You tell a kid, there's a monster under the bed. Well, they're going to believe that there's a monster under the bed. You drop a,
Ah,
I remember being in a store one time, and I guess it was the mother, and the kid was about 8 or 9 years old, and he had two big 2-liter bottles of Pepsi carrying him, I guess, to the checkout, and he dropped one of the 2-liter bottles of Pepsi, and the mother looked at him and said, "Look, you don't even know how to carry a bottle of Pepsi." And I'm thinking to myself, does she realize? Obviously, she doesn't, because I don't think parents get up and say, "I think I'm going to ruin my kid's life today." But
no.
she had no idea the damage that she was going to cause to that little kid, because she's basically saying, "You're clumsy," and
Yeah.
he'll carry that clumsy label with him for the rest of his life.
I see many people like that. Just something as simple, well, from some of some of the people that come to me with things that you would never believe could happen to a human,
Hmm.
So I get from one extreme to the other, but the damage is still the same. The damage is still impedes their ability to have a happy and peaceful life. And that's why I do the work I do. Believe me, it's not to be famous and rich like that. I do it because I care about people, no matter how many people don't believe in it. The point is that it works, whether you believe it or not,
Well, and that's the other thing, and
Yeah.
that's why I'm doing this, is to give people exposure to all the wonderful healing people who are out there. I deal with the subconscious mind,
Yes.
and your subconscious mind is really your best friend. It wants to protect you. So that when you have trauma, uh, no matter what kind of trauma it is, your subconscious mind says, "Well, I'm not going to let you deal with that, because that's too traumatic. So we'll try and figure out something else to do." It doesn't realize that's not really beneficial, but
No, hardly ever.
it just knows it wants to help.
Yeah.
So
Yes.
that's why people, when they're in a car crash, they don't remember what happened before, during, or after the car crash, because that's why. Because your subconscious mind says, "I'm parking that somewhere, and who
And
knows
from a
what."
shamanic perspective, that would be because you've got a soul loss. From my
Sure,
perspective, from the
absolutely,
shamanic
right,
world,
right.
that would be a soul loss. So there's huge gaps of memory that are gone that you really can't recall, but you still perform on that material because your subconscious or your spirit
Yeah,
does remember.
right.
Yeah.
And your subconscious or your spirit remembers everything,
Yes,
and
exactly.
that can be good and it can be bad.
Yeah, exactly.
and,
Exactly.
and in way too many cases, it's really too bad.
I get some, but the work is, and especially when people come to me with an open heart and an open mind, they don't have any sort of expectations that I'm going to fix X,
Yeah,
because then you limit yourself.
sure,
Often
sure,
X does get fixed,
sure.
actually,
Yeah.
but if they're open to my suggestions, well, have you thought about what happened to you when you were 14?
Hmm.
And they think, and they, generally most people will say, you know what, I haven't. And then it takes some time. I don't see people again for probably 6 months,
Yeah.
8 months, maybe a year. They just see me once, and then that's their time to work through their own issues with my support.
I
And yeah,
90% higher than that, 99% of the people I see come with different issues, but the one common issue that most people have is low self-esteem,
yeah, yeah.
because
Insecurity.
something said something to somebody, and then all of a sudden, I had a guy who was unbelievably successful, and he owned a bunch of businesses, had all kinds of trucks and all these toys and everything, and he said, "Gary, I still don't feel successful." And I said, "Well, what do you think the problem was?" He said, "Well, my father never ever told me he loved me." So, and he was in his 50s, a big man, a very successful man, but he still didn't feel successful because his father, he said, "My father was never around."
That reminds
So,
me of an experience I had. So I'll let you finish and I'll
yeah,
tell you
yeah.
about this. Yeah.
So what I did was I got him to go back and to think of a time when his father didn't love him. And he went back into a time, and I said, "Do you have that time in your mind?" And he said, "Yes." I said, "Well, describe how he didn't love you." And he couldn't do it.
Mm.
So I asked him to come back. I said, "Okay." Now I held up a pencil, and I said, "You can see that, correct?" He said, "Yes." I said, "Describe it to me." So he said it was yellow, and it was a point, and it was a rubber on the end, and stuff like that. I said, "Okay, so you can agree with me that if you can see something, then you can describe it." He said, "Yes." I said, "Okay, so now go back to that same incident and describe to me how your father didn't love you." And he still couldn't do it. So I came back to him. I said, "You see, the problem is that you assigned a meaning to the fact that because your father wasn't around, he didn't love you. The fact that your father wasn't around had nothing to do with him not loving you. So I want you to go back now and look at it through at the eyes of an adult and tell me what other meaning your father not being around could have given to you. So we went back and we talked about it, and he said, there was 5 or 6 of us in the family. Mom stayed home with us. My dad had to work 3 or 4 jobs. So he said, I guess looking at it now, the reason why he wasn't around is not because he didn't love us. It's because he did love us, because he had to work so much to do it. So what happens is we see something and we assign a belief to it.
Absolutely.
And then that belief tends to be the problem, and it ends up in him being an overachiever because he figured if his father didn't love him, then nobody would love him. So he became an overachiever, and he had to do all this, and he had to get all these businesses, and he was working himself to the ground to try to prove to himself that he was worthy. When in fact, all it was that young kid who assigned a meaning to an event that had nothing to do with him not being loved by his father. It had everything to do with him being loved by his father, because his father had to work so much to put food on the table for him. And it totally changed his perspective, totally changed how he viewed what happened to him when he was younger.
That's fascinating, to help people look at something from a very different perspective that actually transforms their whole response to that love they thought they didn't get.
Right.
And that's interesting you should bring it up, because it reminded me of a time I had a man from actually United States contact me through my website. And he wanted to tell me a few things. And, I don't want to know, because I don't want to put my own perspectives or my own ideas of what he should be having or doing, That's how I work anyway.
Sure.
And so he just gave me his first name, and I did the journey for him. And I saw him very clearly as a child. And I saw, but in this case, this man had to deal with a very abusive father. And he, the same as the fellow you were telling me about, he was extremely successful. He owned businesses all over the United States, but he couldn't, he was, he was not, let's say, he was really doing destructive things to himself. He couldn't stay in a relationship. Yeah. He was harming himself,
Yeah.
But when I was able to describe this to him, he recalled that. And it can be traumatic. I don't go into great details about what happened. I just know I recognize this. Yeah. And I recognize you felt defenseless at this time. But you don't feel like that now, because you're a grown-up, successful man.
Absolutely.
So, and I described him as a little child. I said, this is what I saw. I described exactly what he looked like as a child, which helped to confirm the fact that his feelings about this, being disenfranchised, not being in control of his life, was actually based in a reality that I was able to confirm to him. Right. So he did very well, and he got very well very quickly. And he sent me a picture of himself as a little boy. Mm-hmm. Exactly. Yeah. And to him, that was, I spent I think it was 3 hours with the man. And that picture was confirmation for him that I was able to validate that experience for him, even some of which he had forgotten,
Go ahead, no, continue.
Comes out to actually forgive his father. And so they reunite. And it was just a lovely kind of an experience.
And you said a really important point is to validate.
Yes.
Because everyone's feelings, everyone is entitled to their feelings, whether people want to agree with those feelings or whether they're based in fact or reality. It's still it's still a feeling, isn't it?
And it has an impact on your life. It absolutely does.
Absolutely. Yeah. Maggie, we're almost out of time.
Okay.
And fascinating again, as I've heard the term shamanism, but I never really got deep into what it was about. But it's a fascinating subject, and I hopefully you'll be able to come back again sometime, and we can do this again.
I'd love to. I'll never stop talking about it.
I know we got to, but and I know you've probably got a lot of advice, but can you just sum everything up and give our listeners some advice that they can use right now to help them deal with adversity?
Yeah, I think the first thing to do is to recognize that you're struggling. I think you first have to acknowledge that you need some help, and that you don't know actually what's happening, but you do know the results of it. And I think that, to recognize that sometimes the difficulties we have can be so far buried in our subconscious that we're just simply not aware of them. And yet we continue to reenact these kinds of things that cause us more damage than they help. So I would say don't go to self-soothing kinds of things that make you ill, but go and find out about different forms of energy work, which what we're doing here,
Absolutely.
holistic work,
Absolutely.
And the other thing I would always tell people is to go into nature. Nature is one of the best healers that you can possibly have. Go walk in the trees, spend time by the ocean, just let that go and just spend time with nature. It's one of the best healers that you can hope to have. That's what I would say.
And for our listeners, if you go back and yourself too, Maggie, go back and listen to Leslie Bridger, who does exactly the same thing. Who her mother was sent home with stage 4 cancer. The doctors told her that was it. She wasn't going any further. And Leslie would take PowerPoint, because she couldn't leave her house. She would do PowerPoint with soothing music of nature, and it was all nature. And her father was a doctor, and when he looked at the results from the CAT scan, he said his wife, that was it, she's finished. So Leslie did this, and within 3 or 4 months, Leslie's mother's oncologist was flabbergasted that there was no cancer left.
Yeah, it's astonishing, but it doesn't surprise me.
And
you know what I do, Gary?
Well,
I make my students at the university, because I teach art history at the university.
Yeah.
One of them is a shamanic course that I offer.
Yeah.
And I make them go out in the summertime and I make them hug a tree for 20 minutes.
Yeah. Yeah.
And when they start, they say, "Oh, no, Dr. Atkinson, don't make us do that." And I said, "No, off you go." And they do. And do you think I can get them off of that tree after 20 minutes?
Yeah.
No way. They stay there all afternoon.
Tina White was on, and she does guided. She's a fairyologist. She did a course in guided tours, and she's another person who supports the living, breathing thing that we call nature that we just take for granted.
Yeah, we shouldn't, because it's such a healing quality. It's amazing. And I think we're too far away from nature, living in our concrete buildings, and we're used to this, but this is not natural. This is not what we're meant to be doing. Yeah.
So Maggie, thank you very much. It's been an absolute pleasure. Like I said, I get therapy every time I talk to people like yourself, and you certainly have an open invitation to come back and talk to us at any time about your work.
I would love that. Thank you so much, Gary. I've enjoyed this.